Hi everyone, my name's Rhonda Mattern, and I'm so glad you're all here tonight. We have a nice intimate space, a nice intimate group. We're going to be talking tonight about present-centered healing and transformation, which I think is probably something most of you have never heard of. Because when I discovered it, I had never heard of it either. What I was actually looking for was a way at that time to maybe, you could call it self-actualization, becoming more aware of myself, living a life that was more me. So that's what I was looking for when I discovered this thing that I had never heard of, present-centered healing and transformation. So we're going to do about a 1-hour workshop tonight. I'd like to also invite the people at home who are viewing to join in. We're going to be doing some exercises, going to be asking some questions. Unfortunately, those of you in the viewing audience can't ask questions live, but you can certainly email them later and there will be a website. So all of you who are here today, really feel free to join in or not join in as you would like. So present-centered healing and transformation, what is it? What does presence mean to you guys? Being present.
Being in the now.
Being in the now. Anyone else?
Really experiencing your experience.
Really experiencing your experience instead of being off in your head somewhere.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
what'd you say again?
Exactly.
Anyone else? What's
It's
present?
being aware.
Being
It's being
aware.
alive. It's being, centered.
Mm-hmm. Alive, aware, centered. Yeah. Anyone else? What's it mean to you?
Showing up.
Showing up. So what shows up when you're present that isn't there before? That's a really interesting question for me. What is it that was missing before when you're not present with someone?
Awareness. Awareness.
Awareness itself shows up. I'd say that's how I would say it myself, that maybe the whole of awareness shows up, right? Because awareness in a human being is built of different pieces. Mm-hmm. And what I realized was happening to me, I had actually gone for years of meditation to try to figure out how to show up, be more present. Meditation helped me connect with this higher part of consciousness, whatever you want to call it, soul, higher self. But I wasn't showing up so well in some of these other parts of me down here, You get off in this place where you can meditate and connect with this higher self, but what about my emotions? Emotions are another part of awareness, right? They tell us things about ourselves. Body is another part of emotion. But a lot of us, and this was really the case for me, I was living from what I say the neck up. Pretty much I was living a lot in my head, second guessing, doubting, whatever. So I go to psychologists to get help with this. And I'm in my head again, analyzing what I'm doing. It helped a lot. And I'm not at all saying that people shouldn't go to psychologists. It really helped. But I had this split where I was going to meditation and there was this part of me over here, my meditating self, this present thing, and then my emotions and my body and all this other stuff. And I just felt kind of split apart. And I realized that the way we approach things out in the world, too, is a little split. We go to church or meditation or whatever for this spiritual stuff. We go to psychologists for this psychology stuff. But here we are, and we're this whole thing. We're not split, but the way we approach it is split. So really, present-centered healing and transformation is an approach that brings together psychology, these lower bodies, if you will, the body, the emotions, the mind, and this consciousness beyond the mind, and teaches you how to be truly present to all of that at once. If you think of these as 4 different kinds of consciousness, body, mind, emotions, and soul or spirit, think of a car with 4 wheels. Most of us, for me anyway, I feel like I was pretty much dragging around, with like a wheel and a half, I mean, I wasn't so aware of my body. Definitely school and all of that got me aware of my mind. Emotions, pretty much, I learned, don't go there, don't touch that stuff. And the spiritual thing was kind of a vague concept, but not like a living experience. So what is different for me about present-centered transformation, it's learning to be present to all 4 of these consciousnesses, if you will, these different types of consciousness in yourself and in others, in brief. So I'm going to just give you that much and give you a second to ask a question or two for clarification. So any questions about what I've said so far? Did I do such a good job that you have? Great. Great, good. So I will take it piece by piece. So this concept of the whole self and the four, what I call the four wheels of human consciousness. Interestingly, the word human, I discovered only recently, comes from humana, this word humana. Hu is an ancient name for God or spirit. And mana is mind, but in Sanskrit, and in mind in Sanskrit means the whole of the lower bodies, what they call lower bodies, the mind, the emotions, the physical body. So even the word human contains these four things. So I thought that was just an interesting little side thing. So anyway, years ago, before I discovered this stuff, this whole presence-centered healing, which, by the way, many different groups are doing, different organizational consultants are using it, some pastoral counselors are using it, clergy who do psychological counseling. I found therapists using it. I found maverick people off in the wilds who have all evolved these similar methods, and I find that so interesting, that people from such varied walks of life are finding similar methods that are working in ways that traditional spiritual approaches or psychological approaches didn't work. So this just jazzed me, because when you see it bubbling up, it's coming from consciousness itself. It's coming from the whole, something to make us more whole. But before I found this, I was really desperate to find something like it. And I was, at the time, just praying, basically, and asking for help spiritually. I wanted to know something that would really help, because spiritual practice had taught me to go into this beautiful, deep place and experience this consciousness beyond my mind. But when I would come away from meditation, all this other stuff would keep me stuck. And I didn't know how to break free of that. So for months and months, I said, please show me how to really transform my life. How does transformation really work? I didn't get any answer, but it just day after day, this was just my prayer, please show me. And one day, a spiritual teacher appeared to me, eyes open. It was a very profound experience. You say, how do I know he was a spiritual teacher? He just had the vibe. I don't know how to say it. This guy was like a very wise being, stood up in front of me and put a picture up in front of me and didn't say a word. And then I stood in front of the picture, looked at it, and disappeared. So I'm going to try to recreate this picture for you, because I think it actually explains this work better than I could. So I need a couple volunteers to do this, maybe 5 of you from the studio audience. All you're going to have to do is hold some strings. And so, okay, come on up, about 5 of you. 1, 2, 3, 4. Can we get one more maybe? Who would be? Oh, this will probably be enough. That is 5. Oh, I can't count. I might be really present, but I can't count to 5. See, so this won't help you with everything. It might not even help you with math, but I'd like to give you a ribbon. I'd like to give you a ribbon. And you don't need a ribbon. You're going to get all tied up. Okay? Yeah, you're going to get ribboned. I'll give you a ribbon, too. Okay, and some of you in the audience, you can have some ribbons. I have some extras, okay? Okay. So what I'd like you to do is each of you take one of your ribbons and put it around. You know how you used to play pony, horsey, when you're going to take your ribbon and put it around Dick. Like, I'll help you to start. So you hold that and pull nice and tight, but stand off to the side so everybody can see him. So you can stand off to the side. Oh, you have a very short ribbon. That's okay. That'll work. So this was the picture that I was shown, just like that. How does transformation work? Can you imagine? You finally have this wise being in front of you. And so I didn't really quite know what to think of it at first, but for some reason, this picture was so compelling to me, but there was more going on in the picture. As I looked at it, I realized that this was what you would think of as soul or higher nature. This was this higher wisdom that's inside all of us. And these strings were all blabbing like crazy. And I'm going to give you guys a sampling, but in this picture, there were thousands of strings. I'm going to give you an example of what the strings were doing. They were all saying things. You're no good. That's going to be your line. Don't say it yet, but you're no good. You'll never amount to anything. You should work harder. You shouldn't work so hard. Okay, now here is your higher guidance, or this is your higher self. Think of this as this part of consciousness that is all-knowing, wise, loving, radiant, and it's trying to get some guidance up to you, some intuition about what to do next with your kids, with your job. So here's this wonderful thing that we all believe and know we have inside of us, this higher nature. And now the string. Start your chorus. Louder, louder. And audience, you can add in whatever your voices say to you.
Really needs to work a lot harder. Really should work so much
You think
harder.
you're ever going to really be spiritually?
Get the idea?
The harder you
Oh, so
try,
he's
the
laughing.
less
Very good. Very good. You can
become this master of spiritual.
Nice job. Let's give them a hand. Studio. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You look like you were enjoying yourself, and I'll tell you.
It felt like a nightmare. With all the voices
Oh,
in
it
my head.
did. So you were laughing, but it felt like a nightmare.
Well, the voices were,
That's right. And does that sound familiar? Felt like a nightmare with all these voices in my head. Anybody ever experienced that? Oh, I should give the kids this. No, I shouldn't give the kids this. No, I should. You know, that's what I saw. Now, what? For me, that picture really did tell 1,000 words. I'd like to hear what it told to you. Was there anything new in this for you? If you think about how transformation might work, I'm just curious, because for me,
Well,
that picture spoke.
we were talking about awareness and the importance of being aware, and the idea is that when you're aware, you really have a new sense of power, a new sense of, but what this showed is our usual state when we're not aware. We're creating all the time this experience of dis-ease, powerlessness, upset, and we're not even aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're thinking there's problems out there, and rather than realizing the problem is really in the way we're
Yeah.
experiencing our consciousness.
Yeah,
And that
so-
was a really good demonstration of that.
Yeah, for me it was very powerful. And anything else that you got from that picture?
The image in the center was not saying anything. All the noise and feedback was coming from outside, and they were all opposing forces pulling. There was no movement. It was just pulling in all
Exactly.
directions.
It's almost like a push me, pull you. And the voice in the middle, if you think, we all have had this sense like there is some deeper awareness in us, but how could it get a word in edgewise? You know what I mean? Yeah, exactly. And you were going to say
Yeah, well,
something.
sometimes it's the self-talk within you. So while it seems like sometimes it's the forces outside, sometimes it's the forces inside.
Mhm.
And you're aware only of the forces inside that are telling you you're no good, or you aren't doing that, or you're not up to standard, and then all of a sudden you find things reinforcing you in that.
Exactly. You find these strings. In fact, it might have been somebody in the 3rd grade. I mean, I can think of people already going back early in my life who told me I was no good, I'll never succeed, I should work harder, I shouldn't work so hard, and 100 other things, and they get kind of lodged in there. Yeah. Any other observations? I'm not an artist, but I find it so compelling how a picture can teach so much.
It really objectifies what we do to ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think for me, the most striking thing was, I knew, looking at this picture, that this part in the middle was this higher nature that Maslow, the psychologist in the 60s, talked about. This higher nature that he was so shocked to find. And it sounds weird now because we almost take this for granted in our culture. But back in the 1960s, when Maslow first posited that there must be this higher nature in people, the idea was that we were basically all flawed and there was something terribly wrong with us and we were just doing the best we could. He discovered that there was this higher nature, which of course for centuries different religious and spiritual teachings have known. So for me what was striking is that I never understood, okay, if we have this amazing awareness in us, why isn't it able to just assert itself? If it's so powerful and if we have this wonderful soul and higher consciousness, what's so high about it if it can't assert, why can't it get out? And it showed me that, oh my gosh, the reason it can't speak is that it gets stuck, it gets trapped by all these voices on top that kind of veil it, that kind of make it hard. If that voice was trying to speak, you could not hear it over the din. So it implies to me that to hear that voice of our true heart, or whatever you call it, the true part of you that really knows, we have to quiet down. You know, we really have to quiet down. So that's when it occurred to me that, okay, what I was doing is I was meditating to get into that voice in the middle. But then I'd go back into the world, you know, and these strings would take over. And so psychology teaches you about the strings, right? You study all the patterns, you study, you know, the different patterns and the different conditioning. And spirituality teaches you how to get into the center, but the two are still separate. What present-centered transformation and healing does is teaches you how to get into the center and then take that awareness of the center out to the strings so that you can see them with new eyes, so that you can see past the illusion or the lie of that string. That string is usually telling you something limiting. But you can have a therapist tell you that for a million years. You can have your boyfriend telling you a million years you shouldn't cave in to other people. You can have your therapist, your mother, your father. It doesn't do any good, right? You still keep, because the string's in there, yap, 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 telling you this and that. What really made the shift for me is learning to go into the center of this awareness, distinguish that from the strings, because I thought these strings were me. All these stories going on, I thought that was me. It wasn't me. It was this awareness in the middle. And then bringing that awareness to these things that had me all, really had me around the throat. You know, in my case, it meant unhealthy relationships, a lot of depression, and living small, I'd say, was a good word to use for it. Just really, I was a bookkeeper. You take a look at me now, you see I'm pretty animated. Do I look like a bookkeeper? No, but I had some string in there saying, you know, you need to get a sensible job. You know, what you want to do isn't sensible. You can't make a living doing spiritually related stuff, which is all my life what I've been interested in. So, you know, I had all these strings keeping me stuck. So today we're going to, for the whole rest of this workshop, we're going to play a little bit with our own strings, with learning how to come into this consciousness in the middle and see these strings from a different perspective. Okay, makes sense to you guys? You ready to play a little bit? Okay. And we don't have to go deep. We know we're on TV tonight, and you in the audience, I'd love you to string along with us to also try some of the exercises we're going to do. So any questions before we go to our next step? It's all pretty clear so far? Okay. So we're going to talk about this consciousness in the middle, that we were the one that was all tied up. We're going to just see if it's possible to get there for a minute. So I'd like you to really experience that. This is the consciousness, whatever we call it, soul, higher self, true self. There are a million words for it. Spirit. What are some other words for it? I don't even know. Other words? God, some people call it God.
Heart.
Essence.
Heart.
Heart. Any other words that you guys use for that part? Okay, you know what I'm talking about.
Soul.
Yeah. Soul, right. So, where is that inside of you right now? That's what we're going to ask, the question we're going to ask. We're not even going to ask the question. We're just going to see if it's possible to experience it. So what I'd like you to do is just get really nice and relaxed. You can, you know, shake or do whatever you need to just, that's it. Come into awareness of your body. It's always great to start with your body. And you can just notice your breathing. Notice if you are breathing. Notice that you are breathing. And just take a minute and move your awareness to your thoughts. And see if it's possible to just let those thoughts fall gently down, deeper into your body. In fact, let your whole attention fall down deep into your body. And see if it's possible to get to a place where everything's completely still. Not a thought. And if a thought arises, you just let it fall down into your body. And then see if it's possible just to gently open your eyes and kind of stay in that still place where you are. As you open your eyes, notice that nothing needs to change. Opening your eyes, you're still in that quiet place. I wish you could see the looks on your faces. There's every possible look. Relaxation, tension, confusion. So I'm curious, was it possible to get to a place where thought stopped or were thoughts still moving? I'm not sure it was different for every one of you. So just let me know, what was it like? Is it possible to get to a place where thought stopped altogether? How many people, or mostly, largely? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would like to hear from some people for whom it didn't stop, because it, yeah, so what was your experience?
I don't think I've ever managed to stop thoughts.
Uh-huh.
No, that's not completely true,
Uh-huh.
but
So you noticed a lot of thoughts?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so then there's the one noticing the thoughts. And so that's the consciousness we're talking about. To be noticing a thought, you know, there's got to be a consciousness noticing thought. So even when you're thinking, this consciousness is still present. So it's not about stopping thoughts. It's really about learning to shift into this space of a deeper presence. And if thought comes up, you just notice it. You don't fight with it. So I've meditated for years trying to get rid of my thoughts. I tell you, the more you try to get rid of thoughts, the more those little devils come and they just get in your way. But how many of you felt like a stilling down in any case? Yeah. So describe that awareness. What did it feel like to you? If you had to give it words.
Very soothing.
Soothing. Any other words?
Centered.
Centered.
Yeah, watching and a witness to it.
You were witnessing. Mm-hmm.
It felt like time just stopped.
Yes.
And I could just hear, I could hear a sound that sounded like the ocean waves.
Hmm.
And it was here. It's, you know, it's been here all along in the background, but all of a sudden I noticed it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very calming.
Yeah. Anyone else?
For me, it was a little bit like a certain level of disengagement from my usual responses to all this. So all this was still here, and I just stopped responding to it. Stopped the conversation. Sort of, it said things, and I just didn't answer back.
Oh, that's lovely. And this is maybe what our usual responses are, right? Some of disengagement with some of that. Yeah. Anyone else? What did you experience? There's no right answer. So.
For me, I switch into visual mode, and all sound and words in my brain cease, and it switches to a color patterns. Just a sort of a soothing, floating sensation of color.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, and I'm much more of a feeling. I perceive movement much more. Some people really feel this inner world much more in a visual way. Some people in a more auditory way. They hear the sound of the ocean. And some people in a very kinesthetic way. And so I used to beat myself up when I was learning meditation and stuff, because they do all these visualizations, you know, picture walking by a beach and this and that. I could never see anything. And so, of course, my string that said, you're no good at this, you're no good at this, you're no good at this, was beating me up. And actually, I was getting nowhere at this whole process of meditation because I didn't realize that everybody has a different way of experiencing this inner state. But we all experience it all the time. It's just we're not aware of awareness, right? We're not aware we're experiencing it. But all of you, it sounds like you got at least a taste of it in a couple seconds. So the good news is that you don't have to meditate for 500 years on a rock in Nepal to get to this place of presence, to get to that place where the intuition, the insight, the deeper awareness comes from. That's the good news. The bad news is what?
Hard to maintain.
Yeah. When you walk back, what happens when you come out of the TV studio or out of the meditative state? This is what happens to me, They're firing. Those voices are firing. So now the question is, how do you bring this awareness that you just experienced to some of these strings? And that's really what this presence-centered healing and transformation is all about, how to do that. So the first thing that I needed to do was get to know my strings. Some of those strings I got to know already in therapy, but it was head knowledge, I knew that I had this victim thing. Okay, string number one. I knew that I had this low self-confidence thing, I knew the strings pretty darn well, but it didn't really stop me or stop them from firing. So the real key is then learning how to get to know these patterns and get to know them when they're firing. Because at first I couldn't even tell these different patterns of thought and emotion. I couldn't even tell that they had taken me over. And they really literally feel like, don't they, when you start getting into one of your trips, your mind trips, you really do go on a trip, right? I mean, it's like, it feels like a bender, they take you off and you wake up and you go, oh my God, there I did it again. There I criticized my boss in public again, or I said yes to my kid again and forked out another $20 when I know I shouldn't do that, So the first key is really learning to catch the pattern as it comes up. And for me, that has required a lot of diligence, but it's also required help from friends and family, because I'll tell you, nobody knows our patterns like our loved ones, right? So part of what I do with some of my friends is, as I get to know these patterns, and that's a whole process we'll go into in a minute, but I just ask them for help in helping me see as they're arising, and then you learn to catch them as they're arising and bring awareness to them. But before you do that, there are so many patterns that you haven't seen, that I hadn't seen. I had learned a lot of patterns in therapy, but there were like probably 30 or 40 or 50 strings that I hadn't even seen. And one benefit of seeing them from this higher awareness is there are patterns that only you know you have. You hide them so well from even yourself that even the best therapist can't see them. I had this huge pattern of fear, terror that came. I won't even get into how I get into it, but I didn't even know it was there. People who looked at me said, you moved to Paris on your own, you got a job over there. I didn't look like a person who was scared. I had so faked myself and everyone else out that I didn't even know I had these strings. So the first thing is learning how to go in and explore and get to know these strings, the deeper ones, because most therapy for me was the surface strings, the ones on the top that were saying, you're no good, you need to work harder, whatever. There were these surface layer, but you could, in that picture I had seen, there were literally thousands. And the good news is you don't have to work on thousands of strings. They're a little bit like refrigerator ice, refrigerators when they're thawing, they drip and they drip and they drip, and then you hear kerplunk, this whole chunk of ice just goes. And that's what I found with my patterns. As I was starting to work with one or two, whole chunks of them would fall away. So once you learn the techniques for doing this, they can fall away very quickly, which is the good news. Because it would get very depressing if you thought, oh my God, there's some deep, horrible unconscious down there that I'm going to have to dig at for years.
The pit.
So,
The pit.
the pit, right. And many of us, you might be veterans like me. I mean, I was like 7 years in therapy. I spent a long time. I came from an alcoholic family, some pretty rough stuff, some pretty violent stuff. I spent years digging and digging and digging. So some of you have already been in the pit, and you already have this idea that, oh my God, this is going to be horrible. And what's so beautiful is this presence-centered way of doing it is enlivening and fun, because guess what? You get to do it from this space that you were just in. And, you know, when you're doing it from this space of compassion, love, awareness, creativity, it's like every session. I know a couple of you in here have experienced set one-on-one sessions, not too many. But I know you, Becky, for example, maybe you could say a few words of what the experience is like for you.
Well, I have to say it's totally different than the traditional therapy that I went through for years. And the difference is that when I experience my patterns from that state of consciousness, I learned to actually have so much compassion and love for those parts of myself that before I was trying to push away or hide from, and it's just a totally different way of approaching it.
Yeah.
It's a paradigm shift, really, and I found that such deep healing can come because I don't have to do anything other than just bring that awareness and love to the pattern, and that's it.
Yeah. It's so simple, isn't it?
It's very simple.
And how do you feel after a session? Because I used to come home from therapy. It was like, oh my God. And not that it, honestly, it really helped me a lot. I'm not saying that therapy isn't important or doesn't have its place, but I would come out like, oh, just exhausted and freaked out, really, to see
Ripped
this
open
stuff.
sometimes,
Yeah. So
Yeah.
how do you feel after the presence-centered work?
Oh,
What's the-
just usually very light and happy or relieved.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm just feeling a lot, but it's from a different place. It's a welcome way of feeling.
Yes.
You know, whereas before maybe I was numbed out and kind of aware that there was something there that was making me feel sad, but I couldn't quite access it. And now I can just really be present with it and feel it, and it's okay, and sometimes it's even way better than okay. It's like, I'm really happy.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't
Yeah.
it? This for me was like a real paradigm shift because, you know, it seemed like the equivalent of a spiritual root canal, basically. Some of this kind of rooting out, you know, really. I mean, and I see clients coming to me needing help. They've been through the rounds. You know, they've been to meditation for years. They've done TM. They've been to executive coaches. They've been to therapists, and they're looking at me like, here comes another spiritual root canal. You know, so it's not like that. It really isn't. And so I know that you might not believe that, so I'd like to maybe play a little and show you in the remaining time we have. Anybody who, you know, it might be a little hard to explore a pattern on live TV in front of complete strangers, but if one of you is willing, I'd be happy to show you a little bit. There are a couple ways to learn this. There aren't many books out on it yet. It's a very new thing, but there are books coming. I go to conferences of people who are doing this type of work, and there are books coming, and certainly I have a website, and there's a little bit up on that. But it's kind of catch as catch can learning. There are probably a couple hundred practitioners that I've found. They're all calling this something different. But I'm starting a consortium to try to get all of these folks together and show them that they're all doing the same thing. They've all discovered the same amazing thing, and to see if we can evolve this to a higher level. So it's a little hard to tell you where to go right now to find out more. On my website there are some resources. There are some practitioners doing it, a few books. But the best way I can show you is just to play with your own patterns. So if anybody's willing or has an issue up in their life, and you know, pick one that you'd be willing to explore, maybe a surface string you're willing to explore in front of the viewing audience. And you guys at home are certainly welcome to explore as we do this yourself. So if we have a volunteer, and if we don't, we'll do something else. So don't at all feel good.
Well, I have one I'm very, very familiar with at the moment because it's been very up this week.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a pattern of a stubborn part of myself that
Mhm.
arises when I have something that I have to do. And then I will do anything but thing I have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And this stubborn child just looks me right in the eye and says, I won't.
Oh, so it's interesting you called it a stubborn child. And it looks you in the eye, so do you actually see it? Or it's
Oh,
just,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very visual.
So you're a visual perceiver.
Yeah.
Good. So the rest of you, you know, if you're looking at a pattern while we're talking about this, don't feel bad if you don't see it. You might be an auditory perceiver. You might have the voice in the head. But in your case, and your name? Just
Juliet.
Like Juliet. So in Juliet's case, she's a perceiver, visual perceiver. Good. So you have this stubborn child looking you in the eyes and saying, I'm not going there.
Right.
Yeah. And what would you like to be happening instead? What would the...
I'd like to get to work. I'd like to just do what it is I have to do so I can go out and play again.
Mm-hmm. And you notice this pattern coming up? Is it a regular thing or?
Yeah, most of the time when I have something, if I say I have to do something,
Mhm.
that'll trigger it,
Mhm.
for sure.
Good. So are you willing to play a little bit with it right now?
Sure.
So in the present-centered approach, we'd always start with getting you a little centered or grounded. And so the whole audience can do this again, because actually your consciousness and your awareness right in the room is going to help Juliet to explore as well. Because the stillness that all of you can bring, same with those of you in the viewing audience, it will be felt by Juliet as she's working. So let's all just take a minute just to get really centered again. So all of you can just move your bodies a little. Take a few deep breaths. And just feel your attention moving down into the body and getting very still. Very good. And so Juliet, you can just notice any thoughts that are coming up from this part of you that's resisting. And just tell me, what are those voices saying?
It's just very resistant. They just, will think of anything to do other than what it is that I have to do.
Mm-hmm.
So they're saying, no, I won't. You can't make me.
Yeah. And is there anything you're thinking back in response? What's your reaction to that voice saying that?
Just real exasperation and a sense of powerlessness,
Mm-hmm.
a sense that I just don't know how to, I mean, I'm the adult, I should be able to overcome this.
Mm-hmm.
There must be some way. I just wish I knew it.
Good. Okay. So now we have that part that's resisting. So you can kind of see that off to one side. And now we also have the part that's exasperated. And so let's see if we can get that part off to another side. So just you're left in the middle. Okay? You're just nice and quiet in the middle. And you probably all have a resistant part, and you all have an exasperated part. So all of you in the audience can feel free to work with your own inner parts that might be resistant. Yeah. So Juliet, is it possible to have that exasperated part off to the side and the other one? And how do you feel now, looking at both those parts? What's your reaction now?
You know, I feel a lot more calm.
Yeah, very good. So just stay centered in that really calm place for a minute, just forgetting about those other parts for a minute. And just continuing to deepen your sense of that presence, that calm presence. Yeah, I can see it on your face. Beautiful. You're just really relaxing. Yeah, so you can kind of look out to that exasperated part and look out to that resisting part. And now that you're in this calm, centered place, you're really dead center. I can feel it in your own awareness, your own presence. Those two parts of you might be needing something from this present part. So is there anything they want from you or need from you?
Well, the exasperated part would love some advice or guidance, direction. Stubborn part would just like some permission to be off the hook.
Yeah, so you can just take a minute inside to give those parts whatever they need, whatever you feel comfortable giving them.
I feel like the stubborn part wants a hug.
Yeah. So if that feels right, that sounds perfect. And so just tell me what's going on now.
Well, it's like the stubborn child is getting all teary-eyed and whimpering and feeling put upon by all these demands, kind of objecting about being made to do all these things.
Anything else it wants from you?
Wants me to understand, I think, that it's just a kid, just wants to play.
Yeah.
Wants me to let off.
So you're willing to do that with that little stubborn part? Is that something you can give it a little bit?
Well, to be honest, yeah, but I do need to get things done.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I do give it lots of play.
Yeah.
It's not like as if you never do.
Yeah, so let's see, there's now the part that needs to get things done. Let's just see if that can step aside too. So now there's the part that needs to get things done. We all know that tension of that part. I can see other people know, oh, I got that one. Okay, that's a strength. So that part that needs to get things done, just see if that one can step aside for all of you. Everyone in the audience, all of you out there in the audience, I know you've all got that one too. Just letting that one step aside. And just seeing how it feels to be free of that one too. Yeah. Any other? Yeah. See how fast it is, how quick you shift your awareness. Yeah. Yeah. So what's left, Juliet, without that part? What's your experience of you in the center now?
Oh, it's wonderful. I feel like I've stepped out of the battle zone.
Yes, that's exactly what you stepped out of. Congratulations. Out of the war with yourself. Yes. Yeah. And your perspective towards those other parts of you now as you look out at them, how do they appear to you now?
I feel very compassionate towards all of them.
Yes. That's the shift. That's, yeah. Yeah, and obviously, if we were not on live TV with a time constraint, we could go much further with these little strings that have showed up to play. But that's a lovely place. So Juliet, you can just take a minute to reassure those parts however you want and, you know, just tie things up. And any of you who are also processing, just taking a minute to, most of all, just feel the relief. Just taking a moment to feel the relief of it. Especially the one who needs to get things done. You can put that one right, just tuck that one right behind us. It can play back there. Thank you. Very brave to play like that with your own state of awareness in front of a bunch of strangers in here and out there. I salute you. So how was that for you?
Well, it was nice to step, to feel like relieved from it, at least for a moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at least for a moment, and that's the beginning. It takes, for me, it was actually 2 years of sessions with a private practitioner on and off. And for everyone, it's a little different. I took some classes. Some of the classes I took are no longer available. The guy who was teaching them has now got cancer and not able to teach. But there are other little classes around. But, there are a couple hundred practitioners and growing. Many of you have read Peter Senge's book on presence. I know there are some organizational consultants in the audience. There are some organizational consultants out in business playing with this presence work. There are therapists, as I said. There are clergy people. And again, on my website, which is www.theonething.net, and they'll be showing it on TV for the audience. But there are some practitioners all over the country listed there. So for me, it took about 2 years of kind of digging with my strings. But what's wonderful is the practitioners actually teach you skills. So it's not like in therapy where I felt that there was something being done to me, and I was vaguely aware of what they were doing to me, but not really. And I certainly couldn't reproduce it on my own. The beauty of this work is that you learn actual skills, and there are 3 basic skills you learn. The first is how to get centered in this awareness in quiet practice sessions. Then how to get centered in this awareness when your boss is in your face screaming at you, which is a whole different level, Then learning how to kind of dissect the patterns, which show up, in your case, they showed up as parts, as, sometimes patterns show up as voices or people in your head. Sometimes they just show up as emotions or thoughts. For some people, they even show up as symbols. People will see symbols. So it's learning to get to know your patterns, how they're structured, what they want from you. You could see in Juliet's case, there were these parts that were all conflicted. Now, traditionally, we try to kill them off, right? But anytime you try to hurt something or kill it off, any of you who have teenagers know that the more you try to resist them, what's going to happen? They're going to come back at you with a force greater to or equal than. So the same principles are true when dealing with these parts inside of you. Or for that matter, any of these parts out in the world around you that are just reflections of you. So what's beautiful about this work, as you saw with Juliet, she shifted into this place of compassion and love where the patterns start simmering down. I don't know if you could feel that, but their intensity started to lessen. And so you get to the point where they just quiet down altogether. Some of them just go away, they reform, they become more creative, but they're different. So that's just like a very, very small glimpse of this work, and now I'm sure you probably do have questions. So I'd like to hear.
I do. Once you're in that great space and you've quieted the noise and you've lifted a level of stress, it seems like a real opportune moment to introduce a positive, fun vision of, wouldn't it feel just great to be in the space that you'll be in once that task is done, once that work is done. And I would think that you're in a much more receptive state at that moment to be able to entertain that vision, and it would sort of lead you into a different state of mind, or a more positive, receptive state of mind for transitioning into re-entry.
So what's the question? I'm curious, I'm not sure I'm getting it. Is it that
What's the next step after
that?
what you're doing?
See.
Is that when you...
That's one possibility. Sometimes these patterns, because they take on a life of their own, they actually have little mini personalities, some of them. And sometimes it is possible for them just to choose a preferred role, as you were saying, a different role, a role that's a little more helpful. Sometimes they just disappear. But the next step, it's always in a way the same step. The work is so simple that it's kind of hard to grasp, because what you're doing over and over is bringing consciousness to these patterns, bringing presence to them. It's kind of the only step. You go in, you get quiet, and you see what voices come up this time. You'll start to see there's the same cast of characters over and over who are kind of running the show. You get to know what their issues and concerns are, what these parts, you find out that these parts actually got split off earlier in your life in response to traumatic events or problems. You get to know them like you would anybody, only it's a part of yourself that's gotten pushed aside. And that process, like Becky said, the love itself seems to be enough. The presence itself seems to be enough. In my case, I learned so much about times in my life where I did get stuck, where this stuff was coming from, that no therapist could find. No therapist could kind of pin this down. And I learned to, like in the moment, first you work with these patterns like over and over, like Julia just did. But then the next step is learning to do it in daily life. So the pattern comes. My pattern was, total terror in front of an authority was a big pattern of mine. So here I am coaching executives, right? This is usually what happens to people who, have a pattern. You get drawn to the very thing, It's just wacky how it happens. So for me, it was coaching executives. And of course, executives are high-power people, so these people were constantly pushing my buttons. And this terrified part from when I was a kid would come up and make me say really stupid things to executives that I later regretted, and it cost me a job in one case. It cost me a job from a very high-paying pharmaceutical company because this part just came up and said something stupid, and I'm sure a few of you have had that same experience. I know I'm not the only one. So what you learn to do is stay grounded the moment that pattern is arising in real time, live, like we are tonight. And that is why I call this the one thing that changes everything. Because when you can stand dead straight in that compassion and that quiet, in the moment when you need it most, oh my God. At the moment when your kids are pushing your buttons, when your husband's pushing your buttons, when your boss is pushing your buttons, it really changes everything. There is a source of creativity and wisdom in me that I never knew I had. All that meditation, all of that stuff I did didn't unlock it the way this did, because I learned to go right into the center. The very first time I did it live, I'll never forget. It was the most profound experience, and it happened at the Red Cross. We have somebody in the audience here that I used to work with. Happened at one of my jobs where I was coaching these executives that were pushing my buttons like crazy. And one day, one of these executives came up and started just on my case about something I did wrong. It was a very minor little thing. It was changing the dress code for an executive leadership conference. But you know what bosses get upset about. So this person's coming up and screaming at me. This is in cube land. You can picture a corporate job. Screaming at me. And I feel this terrified child, like when I was a kid and Dad was drunk and the whole thing, taking me over. But I had studied this pattern so many times on my own, not studied, but brought this presence to it so many times that I finally caught it. Oh my God, here it is. Here I am. Here's a moment that I can play differently. And this person started screaming at me, and she said my name over and over, screaming. You can imagine all the people in the cubes, Rhonda, 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 Rhonda. Just like that. And I froze. And I just did what Julia just did. And I went right inside. Really quiet. And I was trembling with terror. But I just let my consciousness open to this terror, open to this person in front of me, open, open, open. And suddenly I said, Jill, you just said my name 7 times. Now, I don't know why I said that. What would you normally say? Normally I would defend myself. I'd say, calm down. All I said was, you just said my name 7 times. It came out of me from I know not where. And she said, I did, didn't I? And she looked like a deer in headlights. I wasn't fighting her. I wasn't trying to change her. I was just opening my consciousness to her. She pulled me into her office. She sat down and she began to sob. And she cried for the next half hour. And she said, this job has never fit me. it's all wrong for me. I need to do something else. 2 months later, she was out of there.
Thank you.
And so this is the possibility. This is kind of the next step, if you will. It's like first you work one-on-one to get to know these patterns, then you find, by sheer determination and by practice, the ability to get into this present state where you're not fighting with your parts and you're not fighting with these parts out here. And oh my God, it changed everything for me. My whole life flip-flopped. Relationships completely shifting as I learned to just be dead center in the middle of this place. And I'm still learning it, and I'll probably be learning it the rest of my life. And do these things come up and make me say stupid things? Just ask my family and friends. They will attest to you. I don't believe there's an ultimate enlightenment or perfection, but I do believe it's possible to live in a very different way from this stuff.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
any other questions? We have about 2-3 minutes.
It seems similar to, I'm trying to distinguish how it's different than mindfulness meditation. In mindfulness meditation, you don't focus on a mantra, you don't focus on a guru. You focus literally on being present to what's happening.
Yes.
So in some ways, it seems, I'm trying to see if it's...
It's very similar, and in fact, many of the people who are doing presence-centered work come out of the Buddhist traditions because they have a good head start. The difference is the learning to bring the presence to the patterns and learning to do it in real time. You know, there are many jokes in spiritual communities about these wonderful gurus who get into these deep places, but they're sleeping with their students and they're stealing money and they're drinking on the side. So you can get this, like what was happening to me. I learned to get into these exalted states, but when I came back to the strings, they were still there. So I think the difference is really bringing the consciousness intentionally to the strings and learning what they really are, how they work, learning to be in a new relationship with them. That was the shift for me.
So it's not passive, just letting what come, you actually intentionally...
It's not passive. You intentionally get to know these parts. So that's the psychology part, see?
Mm-hmm. Okay,
It's bringing these two together, the strings and the study, but from a higher awareness. And that's when the compassion comes in, or like Becky said, wow, it's a different experience. Most people go out and they're energized. My sister just passed away a month ago. I did sessions with people all during the time she was dying. When my mother died, the same thing. People said, how can you work with people during that time? It's because this is so enlivening, because you're looking at these strings from this loving place. So I think we're about out of time, so we'll take some more questions afterwards. Please feel free to write me on the website. And thank you so much for participating. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Website?
It's www, the one thing, and one thing is the numeral, theonething.net. I'll send you all. So, yeah, you can just, there are classes there are information about sessions. The sessions I took were actually on the phone. You don't need to find a practitioner in your local area. I work with somebody on the phone because she's the only one I could find.